Thank you for all your questions that have been coming in. We've got about 25 minutes, half an hour now to go through as many as we can. So the moderator back, first one up. What and how do you think we could give back to residents as an industry, as individual businesses and organisations? Geerte, do you want to start that, seeing you've talked about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just showed the funny example about the plastic fishing. Opening up your doors with whatever. We have hotels that have on Monday, they cook for the homeless people because they know on a Monday their kitchen is not really busy with the clients because there are not so many clients. We have hotels that open up their swimming pool on Tuesday and Wednesday morning for the residents in the area because most of the times that is a little of a lower time in. So there are a lot of things, and again, it doesn't have to be always huge and big because you do contribute a lot also besides money and job to the cultural infrastructure, the public infrastructure. In our case, visitors pay city tax, so we have a much better cleaning system nowadays, but make it simple because at the end, I think it's very important for residents that they have the idea that you know that they are there and that they are important because they're the soul of the city.
Great. Adam, I think this probably has to come to you next with some particular issues we have in the city at the moment. What can we do better to give back to residents?
Is this one on? Yeah. I mean, I think we have to start from the basis of there's an enormous amount of experience provided to residents in the city already, and we can't be shy about celebrating that. The 750 people, dare I say, that were at an event last week to talk about some of their concerns about tourism and the use of public space, I'm damn sure the vast majority of them, if not all of them, will have been to a restaurant for dinner in the last few weeks. They will have enjoyed some element of amenity that is reliant on tourism in one form or another to support it. The thing that I think needs to be really taken away from the entire city is the need to communicate. I took that very strongly from the Amsterdam model, but it is about community. It's not about business operating in a vacuum, just providing services as they always do, and assuming that life will continue as normal. There has to be a relationship there. And I think even in my own community in Leith, if you ask the local community councillors or other people in residence groups or taking forward community projects who the general managers were of the hotels in the ward and in their area, I don't think they would know the name. And I don't think the general managers would know the name of the chair of the community council or other community reps. Now, that isn't a great starting point for a relationship that is required to make a cohesive community where you have private sector working together with public, working together with community. So as a starting point, before you get to the point about what you're getting out of this as a resident, I think the starting point has to be a more community focused, and that starts with dialogue, and it has to be a two-way dialogue where people know the names, know the faces, know the people, and know the offer, because that is, I think, how we foster the relationships. That if a hotel has a swimming pool that's been underutilised and the toddler group of a community centre is looking for something to do on a Tuesday afternoon to fill up their programme, that relationship can born a huge amount of public good. So I think it's the engagement as a starting point that has to be initiated, and that's a challenge I'd put to everyone in this room, and it's a challenge I would echo when I go and visit community councils and other residents groups across the city.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on to the next question? I'm keen to get through as many as we can. Oh, for Alba, there we go. Has banning new hotels in the city centre changed visitor behaviours?
Should we go in, or shall I reply? No, definitely not. I mean, that was not the idea of it was not a matter of redistribution geographically. It was a matter of reducing. It was not the aim of the plan, which was the aim of the plan was not to ban hotels, but to preserve the right to housing, to preserve a mixture balance of activities between visitors and residents all over the city. So it comes to a zoning plan banning new hotels in the city center, but not as a matter of changing behaviors, but trying to balance this situation, which is also very linked with what we were talking just right now, among the power of negotiation for a shared resource and a scarce resource, which is square meters. There's a struggle for square meters of housing, of commercial facilities, of pathwalks, of streets, of squares. So it's also, if you fool and you intensify the tourist uses in an already overcrowded spaces, you don't allow other things going on. And I think we have to be really aware that tourism must not jeopardize all the ways of living the city, because it goes against the industry itself. So no, they do not change behaviors, because everybody goes to the same tourism spots. They go to the Sagrada Familia, to the Ramblas, to the Park Güell, if they like soccer, and they are not from Chelsea, they go to the Camp Nou. You know, like they go to exactly the same places, because if you go to Barcelona, you expect to visit, you know, the beauty of this kind of place. So there was not a redistribution logic, but to protect other ways of living permanent, but also not intensifying the tourist uses of this red and orange area that was shown on the map. And also, there are some restrictions on the allowed area and some urban planning counterparts. So there are zones where new hotels must provide for a social housing square meters, for instance. So this is so that was the logic.
Right.
Okay.
Have you had an issue in Barcelona with retail buildings no longer being shops? And then what do you change them into if they can't be hotels? Have they become more tourist attractions, offices?
They become franchises from Inditex. I mean, we have this all over the city. They are exactly the same shops. They take them over. I mean, if you're referring to the traditional retail family-owned shops, if they are in a central position, they become franchises of clothes or mainly clothes. I mean, and this kind of global change that are Spanish global change already, because they are very tied with the real estate market, and this is a fact.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next up, how will we effectively realise the partnership, taking forward the strategy action plan with our residents to effectively realise sustainable growth? That sounds like it's got Peter Jordan written all over it.
Yeah. I wonder if I can sum this up in a short space. So I suppose we have to ask, over the past year, there have been, I think it's important to be honest and upfront and say, sure, tourism has, at certain times, in certain places, produced some quite challenging issues. We also have to be honest about the fact that that will continue, even if whether growth comes or not, and we're pretty sure that it will, that will continue. And it's important to, like I say, be upfront and honest about that. And then decide, well, do we have the mechanisms, or the means, or the spaces to debate these issues calmly, with respect, as Geerte said. Because, as we know, often this is, I suppose, it's easily played out on the front pages of the local paper, obviously also in the debating chambers of the council, and we have to work out perhaps have we communicated with residents quite as effectively as we could? Are we listening quite as well as we could? Because as it turns out, of course, tourism, as I said, is a lot more complex than we realized. So I suppose we have to ask, is what we've got at the moment satisfactory for that? I don't know. It's not up for others to decide about what's that. I'd be interested in Adam's opinion on that. And perhaps it's time also, obviously, as part of the action plan on this strategy, to look at the governance, to look at how we improve dialogue, to create some of those spaces. Dare I say, invest a little bit in this as well, to sort of create this opportunity to effectively have this discussion with residents, because we're all in it together. We're in for the long haul. So it is, obviously, this is going to be a critical need in the future. I'm curious to know what Adam has to say about this.
Thank you.
I throw the ball, I throw the grenade over here.
Yeah. I think there has to be, to pivot onto the minutiae, the council earlier in the week, when it approved this strategy, approved so with a few amendments. One was looking at the strategic implementation group and how we move as a collective, as a city, to create the action points and we need to take it forward. And one of the amendments in relation to that we accepted in order to pass it politically was the involvement of residents within that process. Now, that isn't to say that there's some panacea of 518,000 people that can somehow sit around one table and have that approach. That's patently not going to be the case. But having some of the most affected residents, particularly city centre, as we're aiming to move to mitigate some of those pressures and change the way we think about some of these issues, having some of those reps with direct connections into some of those networks locally, I think will make a big difference. Now, we have to shape that right. We have to make that meaningful in terms of the information that's circulated. It can't be there's one set of information that's the real information and then there's the stuff that we're allowed to give to residents. They have to be included in that discussion and in a meaningful way. And as we look to a strategy which does aim to more sustainably put our city on a footing where Leith and Portobello and South Queensferry and Ratho as new wave centres built there, and we look to spread those attractions and benefits across our city, there will be need to do more of that engagement across more of the city. But right now it feels very much like the city centre residents are the ones that need to be connected into that discussion more than anyone else. And doing that would be a great first step, I think, to build a much closer partnership between the community that are experiencing these issues predominantly and acutely and the council industry that's aiming to change.
But I think if I can add, what really helped in Amsterdam that we looked, because there's no such a thing as a visitor and there's no such a thing as a resident. So we are talking a lot with residents in the old city center, how we can work together to minimize the nuisance that is caused by some of the visitors. We do that with the residents and with the politicians and with just the bars and all the clubs that are in there, because nobody likes nuisance. But we also go to the southeast side to talk with residents and industry to see what their demands are, because they have a totally different idea, because they sometimes complain, why is the city center only looking at the negative part of tourism? It can bring us so much. So to make the sustainable growth, you should connect, I think, residents around something that really they feel in their heart. So when it's the residents that feel that it's a burden, talk with them how you can solve the issues. And but also talk with the residents in the upcoming areas, because there you shouldn't make the same, well, as we see a mistake in these areas by just shoving tourists over there. Say like, okay, what is the identity of your neighborhood? Who do you want to be? And how can you use the visitor economy to become a better area for your residents? And one other trick really helps, do not use the word or all the time, but use the word and. The tourism industry brings a lot to the city, and it can cause a harm. You know, the spread, we also have a hotel stop in Amsterdam. Yes, it was that a lot of more people now stay in the residential other areas, and yes, they still go to the highlights in the city center.
Okay, Alba, you want to come
Yeah, I just wanted to point that this community engagement is really important. I strongly believe it, and one of the main points is just to make everybody realize how difficult it is to set up many things that are going on, many issues at stake. Because many times there's this resident perception that for instance, the city council does not enough to solve their own problems. First, we need a shared, as I said, a common ground to share different realities of the same topic, let's say tourism, but then to share also that the limits of this action, jointly with the industry, and I strongly believe that this is important, just to recognize the other one, the different parts, but also to get to the point that I'm afraid we're not going to be able to solve everything. So this is also important as a democratic measure in a scenario and tool. and I strongly believe it's crucial. But not denying the certain interests, but evolving all the interests all together, and trying to set up, okay, what can we do, and then also make emergent the limits of what can we do, because certainly we can do everything we would like to. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Next question, please. Geerte, it looks like it's coming to you.
It's always very well. They loved it. No, I always are very. We already have a tourism tax for a long time in our city. I have to be very honest about that. And I do not have an opinion if it's good or bad, because it really has to do with the whole tax system in your country, in your city, etc. We used to have a tourism tax of 3%, then it went 5%. Nowadays it's 7% plus an extra €3 per person per night. So it's quite a lot. It's very well received by the city council. In 2015, they got €45 million in cash, and now they get €185 million in cash. But in the industry, of course, it's not nice for a hotelier that they keep raising it. But on the other hand, you see a lot of investment is done by the city. We have a much better waste management system, and so the city is much cleaner, and so it's much better for our visitors. They put a lot of this money into our new subway system, what is good for the locals, but it also benefits the visitor economy, because it's much easier for the hotels that are not in the city center to connect the visitors with the city center. So there is not a right or a wrong answer. I do believe, though, but that's more of a personal point, that it is logical that somebody that comes to your city and uses your city as well also contributes to the services that you use. You know, you cause waste if you're somewhere at a city. You use the public transport system, you use the cultural institutions that a lot of times are subsidized by, so why not pay a little contribution? But that is more why, otherwise it's always on the taxes of the residents, and that would be a bit awkward as well.
Okay. Adam, I know you touched on it in your presentation. I don't even want to add anything in terms of tourist tax.
No. I ditto.
Right, so Alba.
Yeah, I think there's here a question. I strongly support the idea of a tourist tax for two reasons. One, the study says that the tourism demand is elastic enough to absorb a little amount of this cost of the accommodation. So it won't affect actually the performance. In Barcelona, they did not all over the world. So, and also it's a way of trying to make responsible the visitors for the city they're living for a short period of time, and also to strengthen this relationship between the public administration and the visitors, which is also a nice issue that we have not talked. We talk about the engagement of the local community, but we do not talk pretty much about tourists themselves as subjects. We actually do not pretty know tourists as a political subject. So tourism tax is also a way to involve visitors and make them responsible for the traces and they're living in here. So, yeah.
Yeah, and
I would
again,
say
it's also
don't be afraid, and also a way of because it's also a way of responsibility also for the industry. Like, it's not the panacea, it's not enough, of course, and it's not just the most important thing. I fully recognize it, but there's a lot of things that can be done with these revenues from the public administration. I mean, well, this kind of thing.
Geerte, last point?
Yeah, it's not, we raised the tourism tax, but we still have a growth of 10-12% every year. So that, of course, there's how do you say it? Elasticity. So there is somewhere a way there it will go down. But nowadays, with the enormous demand, it's not making our destination less attractive or anything.
I think we've got time for one more question, maybe. Time's running on. Hopefully. With many new hotels and attractions opening soon, what actions have been undertaken to ensure that there are no skills or staffing shortages regarding recruitment?
Well, no.
I think that's Edinburgh Pacific. So, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, a number of things. One, trying to link the local market to the industry. I know St James's development, for example, has a 2,000 strong academy as part of its development. So the aim to try and get people through that from the local jobs market and into new major developments like the St James's is a crucial part of that. Skills academies operate already across the city. It's a model that I think works incredibly well, and it takes people who otherwise wouldn't have connected into a sector because of whatever reason they weren't interested in it, or they were just too far away from the jobs market, puts them in a training course, and then leaves a really solidified opportunity at the end of it. There's a whole host of challenges in that question. Long term, the council is working with EICC on a prospect of a new training hotel to try and create a skills pipeline in the industry for future. That's more medium to long term, looking at Fountain Bridge. But in the immediacy, it's, I think, council doing what we can in terms of making sure people who are already here, who already feel part of the city, who are already perhaps working in the industry, feel absolutely part of the citizenship of the city, because the inherent purpose of that question is about tomorrow, but actually there's a relevance with everything that's going on and everything that will go on literally tomorrow about today in that question, and how we secure what we have right now in terms of people in our city and people working in the industry right now. Because the macro picture, it was talked about earlier, the global forces that are working, like tides casting us back and forth. The global picture in terms of the UK doesn't feel great right now to a great number of people. And it's our job as a city, our job as a council, our job as a country, as in Scotland, to fight against that, to go against the grain. As UK government ministers continually talk, as the Home Secretary does, about foreign criminals, as if there's no other kind of criminal. It's our job to challenge that, to fight against it, and to stand with the people who live here, because the 40,000 EU nationals that live in this city are our citizens, just as the people from Paisley and people from everywhere else. They're all part of the 518,000 people that make this city what it is and so fantastic. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be done on the tomorrow aspect of that question. But the today aspect of that question is making sure that the city is the welcoming place that we know it is, that has attracted so many people to come and work here, live here, found their families here, and build their careers here. And many of them built their careers in hospitality.